Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Efrain Wash Process Peru from Father's Coffee Roastery. And there's the bag right there. And Father's, based out of Ostrava, Czech Republic, and they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel multiple times before, including most recently when we reviewed the Zabigi, a wash-processed Ugandan coffee that honestly left me pretty stumped. When I purchased that coffee, I decided to purchase this one alongside it, as it felt like a pretty safe choice, and also fulfills our quota of reviewing origins that we haven't reviewed much of this year. So we will see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 37. And recipe we went with for this coffee was the same as the previous one, which was a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 98 degrees Celsius, about 208 degrees Fahrenheit. And I also like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this one is also in line with the previous Father's coffee, and that's to say that it is listed as a filter roast. So it is on the slightly lighter side of things, but maybe not to the extent as some of the very light coffees that we review on this channel. So I identified that one as maybe a more developed light in terms of the roast profile, and I could stick to that for this one as well. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and opted for the V60, and the coffee had a mostly interesting herbal aspect to it, as there was some slight sweetness in terms of this moderate berry sense, but for the most part it was darker in complexion with a fair bit of herbality as well. So an okay start, maybe not necessarily what I was expecting, but I just kind of attributed that to this coffee being a little early after it's been roasted. Day 16, ran it through the Chemex, and there was a little bit more sweetness, but not quite to the expected level, as the herbal aspect is a little less pronounced, though it is slightly vegetal with a slightly minty quality. Bitter as well. It wasn't overly ideal from the second impression either, even though this was a better second impression. So not off to the best start, but on day 19 we opted for the April brewer, and there was a little bit more vibrancy in line with previous iterations of the qualities you might expect from Peruvian coffees as opposed to the listed notes. That being that there was a fresh fruit brightness and herbality, but it was skewing more on the sweeter chocolate side of things with more of that interesting herbal aspect. So still not entirely sure what to make of this one. Here on day 22, increased the temperatures and concentration through the V60, and it did improve a fair bit as it was offering more definition in terms of a milk chocolate sweetness, with a little bit more of a citric brightness in line with the listed grapefruit, so a slightly better day in general. And day 25, same adjustments to the Chemex, and it was pretty similar to the earlier days without anything being overly notable or standing out, as it continues to remain herbal bitter with a fair bit of the listed grapefruit, but for the most part a classically South American base. So once again, sped run through the first 5 days of this coffee, as for the most part I got 5 different cups of coffee from these first 5 runs, as this coffee hasn't necessarily been the most consistent one either, and nowhere near the expectations I had for it from the start. But we continue on to day 28, back through the V60, and I was really struggling with it, as it seems to lack a strong or defined profile, rather skewing a little bit more in the milk chocolate direction yet again, with a slightly vegetal quality, a bit more delicate and tame overall, so another just okay day. And the main reason I settled on the Chemex was because I tried it again through the Chemex here on this day 30 mark, and the coffee was the best it's been up to this point, with a slight bit more definition and overall vibrancy, skewing a little more in the fresh fruit direction, though it was slightly fleeting as there was a lighter body and profile to the cup in general. Still moderately tame with a little bit more of a focus on the citric brightness, but just kind of getting that out of this coffee as opposed to the very strong herbal aspect was much better, though the herbal aspect did follow afterwards as it was present within the cool down, complemented by the minty quality that I'd mentioned earlier as well. Day 32 through the Chemex, and the coffee has remained consistent since that point going forward, as it's offering a multitude of moderate aspects in a slightly tart berry sense, with a citric component as well, and a fresher dark stone fruit slight savoriness as well. So experiencing that was probably one of the best things I'd experienced from this coffee, which has been a little all over the board, as there's a classic South American component to this one in general, that of course being that strong chocolate base. So Interesting. Again, it hasn't necessarily been the most consistent coffee. Even when settling on some adjustments, it seems to offer just some things that I wasn't experiencing from the day-to-day operations of this one. So not entirely sure what to make of it, but let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and we have one level 4, and that is the cleanliness level 4. Yes, and even without an overly defined profile to this one, it still is justified at that mark, as there isn't anything to kind of take away from the clarity of this one, even if the aspect isn't necessarily skewing in one specific direction. All right, then we have a bunch of level 3s, and we'll start with the finished level 3, and that's yet again the same as the previous coffee we had from Father's. It just really doesn't seem to have a long-lasting finish. It's quite quick, and it doesn't skew very heavily in any specific direction, as the sweetness isn't overly abundant. Most of those things being at a level 3 just kind of goes to show that the finish we are getting from this one, which is mostly this kind of herbal minty quality, is present, and it just kind of dissipates from that point. So not entirely sure what to make of that. And there's not a whole lot of brightness either, because that also scores at that level 3 mark. So those 3 things just kind of gives this one a very moderate, very tame profile from start to finish. So having those 3 things all be at that level 3, I'm not sure I've seen that from a lot of coffees that we've reviewed. So that's definitely not what the expectations I'd had. Spice, level 3, yes, and that's going to be that minty quality that I'd mentioned. It's something I picked up early on and something that was present throughout this one. So kind of interesting in that sense. I'm not entirely sure that any of the notes, I'm going to be completely honest, they have some things here. I don't know what a chokeberry is. I don't know what green gage is, but whatever they are, I'm wondering if maybe those are the minty-like qualities that I was experiencing within this one. So level 3 for the spice. Berry fruit, level 3. As I kind of mentioned, there's a very slight tart berry aspect that's present within this one. Citrus level 3, there's a very slight lemon aspect that's present within this one. Stone fruit level 3, there's a very slight darker fresh stone fruit present within this one, like a slight plum-like quality to it. Chocolate level 3, there's a noticeable chocolate aspect to this one. As you can see, these are all in moderation for what's a pretty tame and moderate cup of coffee to begin with. So having all 3 of those things score at the level 3, and then the chocolate also score at the level 3, you're experiencing all of these things at times, but none of them are overly pronounced. So this coffee just seems to offer a lot of things, none of which being overly strong, defined, or pronounced in this one. Caramel level 3, yes, there was a slight bit of a caramelized sweetness to this cup in general, but given that the sweetness was more moderate and tame, that was another one of those things where you're like, there's brown candy caramel sweetness to it, but it's not overly pronounced either. Bitterness, level 3, yes, and that was in the sense of the herbal component as well as the cedric component, so it offered that too. Savoriness, I think that goes without saying, is something I've kind of mentioned. It is in terms of that herbal aspect. Once again, I'm telling you that really seemed to have a huge role in this one, because whatever I was experiencing at the start that I thought was really nice and pleasant, it kind of finished off into that minty, savory, herbal component, and it really did seem to kind of take away from the slightly positive experience I'd had, kind of turning into this coffee that left just an interesting finish in general that was also quite fleeting. Body level 3, yes, and this one surprisingly had a little bit more body than I might have expected. I made the tasting wheels side by side with the Ugandan coffee as well as this Peruvian coffee, and I remember taking the notes and saying, I'm making them both with the Chemex, but this one seems to have a little bit more body, so that's probably why it scored at the higher side of that, but I would still say it's on the lower side of level 3. But as I'm kind of looking at this tasting wheel, for the most part, we discussed kind of everything on it, because there's at least a little bit of everything in this tasting wheel, but nothing that's really standing out. So I do think that this is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I'm wondering if maybe I just messed up both of these Father's coffees. I'm going to be completely honest, because neither of them were what I was expecting going into them. And given that my experiences with this coffee roaster in the past have been almost exclusively positive, it's really surprising to me that both these coffees turned out this way, and I'm going to point in the direction yet again of the starting point I like for all these coffees. I want the sweetness to always at least reach level 4. My main objective with these coffees is to at least get it to that level 4 mark and get a very defined fruit or floral aspect to them as well. But I couldn't get that, and I'm pinning the blame on me, and I know I was just kind of going back and forth with brew methods, which is, I mean, pretty normal, and trying to adjust things here and there, but At no point would I ever say that this was an overly sweet coffee or had an overly defined profile to it. The one profile I experienced the most was one that I wasn't the biggest fan of and one that I was trying to tone down for the majority of this coffee. So it's to kind of say that this one wasn't my type of coffee. It wasn't with my expectations. It wasn't in line with my expectations. And this one also left me stumped, just like the Ugandan coffee did. But just like with the Ugandan coffee, I'm going to point the blame towards myself as me being the person that couldn't figure this one out. I do have some more of this coffee, so maybe with a little bit more time and rest and some more adjustments, I can figure this one out. But as of right now, this one also left me a little stumped. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, I think the best way I can point somebody towards for this one is somebody that's looking for a little bit more moderate and tame of a coffee in general, because it does offer nice clarity. It is still a slightly moderately more light profile in general, and it does give you some complexity in terms of the fruit direction, some classical proving characteristics as well. But outside of that, I'm not entirely sure that there's too much else I was able to pull from this one. Not a whole lot of brightness, and again, not an overly defined profile. So that's the best way I can point somebody towards for this one. Something maybe a little bit more of an everyday coffee, a little bit more of a crowd pleaser coffee, a little bit more of just a tame, moderate coffee in general. But that's the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Efrain Wash Process Peru from Father's Coffee Roastery. Thank you for watching.